hair is a very significantly different style today. I hope that's okay with all of you. Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is SockBot, and today I want to talk about this guy right here. So yes, I did it. I did it again. I went and built another Game Boy because, well, what else am I going to do with my time during quarantine? But as I mentioned in the video, which if you haven't seen it, I did actually do a regular Game Boy Advance about 2 weeks ago. If you did see that video, you'll know that I mentioned that I was planning on doing this. I was really excited to do this, and was hoping to not take more than the 2 hours it took for the last one to do. And, well, spoiler alert, it did, and it's all my fault because this could actually be done in under 2 hours. It could probably be done in under an hour if you've done one before, or if you just don't do any of the stupid stuff I did. So today I'm going to be talking about my experience modding my Game Boy SP, putting in a new screen, putting in a new shell, buttons. I didn't add a new speaker, but may do that in the future. But yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So if that's something that interests you, feel free to continue watching. Leave a like down below, subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of stuff, because I truly, truly love doing this and very well might do another one. Just probably not 2 a month because I don't have the money for that. I mean, I barely had the money for these two, but hey, what else am I going to do during quarantine? Spend it on bars or I don't know. I don't normally spend my money on anything else, so I don't know why I'm acting like this is different than usual. But yeah, let's get right into the actual build of all of this. So to start off, I just want to say that I am not a professional at all. If you do want to use the tutorial I used, it was very useful and will probably be more useful than this video, and I will link it in the description. But for mine, I do want to tell you what I did just so I can show you where I ran into issues. So I will be talking about the different steps, so hopefully you can combine them with that video and end up with a little more knowledge on how to do this. So to start off, you're going to take the original SP and remove all 5 of the tri-wing screws from the back, 4 in the corners, and 1 under the cartridge, or rather where the cartridge would be. Next, you're going to remove the 1 screw that holds the battery cover on. This is a Phillips head screw, and then remove the battery itself. And under that, there is 1 more tri-wing screw that you can remove, and yeah, I totally forgot to do that here, so don't be a dummy like me. Once you have that off, you can wiggle the back free. It might be a little bit difficult, especially if your Game Boy SP is dirty like mine is. This was from eBay, not my own. My own is staying safe and staying, well, nostalgic, I suppose. Following that, you will expose the circuit board and you can take out the 3 Phillips head screws that hold it into the bottom of the SP, and then you will see the ribbon cable on the other side. Be very careful if you do want to reuse the screen for any reason that you don't tear this ribbon cable, but you can just pull down the little pins on each side of the little plug there for the ribbon cable to release it from the circuit board. Now, if you have replacement hinges, a replacement shell, and a replacement screen, you're fine. If you need any of those, you will have to then take apart the top as well. So if you're going to do that, make sure you take out all the buttons if they haven't already fallen out, and the speaker, which you can see I totally forgot to take out. But following that, you're going to look quite under the ribbon cable. You'll have to lift it up, and there's 1 more screw there to take out that holds the hinge cover in. I would do this now. It's just easier than doing it later on when you're trying to remove everything from the top. So then flip open the Game Boy, and you're going to remove the rubber feet from, I think there's 5 altogether, so from the corners and the middle in the top. They are bigger in the corners, in the top right and the top left corners. The other ones are a little more flat, but you should be able to get them all out with a pocket knife or some kind of relatively sharp knife, and remove the tri-wing screws from underneath them. If you do want to reuse these feet for any reason, like in your new case, or if you're going to be reusing this case and you're only replacing the screen, make sure you don't remove them with a knife. I suppose you could. In fact, mine didn't really get any cuts or damage in them at all from when I took them out, except for 1, and it did have a pretty good slice in there, so I would be careful. Either use a differently sharp knife or just make sure that you're very careful when you're taking them out. But they do require quite a bit of force because they are very much stuck in there, depending on how old your SP is, with some kind of adhesive, but should be a pretty easy process once you get the hang of it and once you get 1 or 2 open. Then take out the tri-wing screws like I said, and the back of the top should just pop right off. Be careful here, the screen is loose and it will just fall out, so if you have any use for it or want to keep a hold of it, don't let it fall. So take that out, the little ribbon should slide right through the hinge there. Again, keep an eye on that hinge cover that you removed with the screw, just in case you do want to reuse the shell at any point. And following that, well, now's kind of the fun part, because we get to start with the hinges. It's probably the most stressful part, I would say, if you don't have new hinges, and I would just recommend you get them because it'll be a lot easier. But I braced my the bottom of my SP against this little rubber tool that came with my set, and I used a hexagonal bit that fit perfectly between the prongs of the hinges to just push them out. Now, I found this very, very tough to do, and you can see that there's little bits of, I think, plastic coming out all over. I didn't notice any visible damage on the hinge or on the case after I did this, but that's all I can imagine it is. But other people didn't seem to have this issue. Again, I would just recommend getting new hinges. People say that they're not as snappy as the ones that come with the original SP, but honestly, my original ones weren't that snappy anyways. But following that is the part that I tried like 8 times that I messed up. Again, this is why it took like 8 hours instead of 2. But if you have those hinges out, great. That's probably the most forceful thing you're going to have to do this entire time. You can take your new shell and slide them right in, but you want to make sure that before you do that, 1, the SP is closed and you're sliding them in while it's closed, and 2, if you do want to remove those little covers on the end of the hinges and replace them with whatever color you got with your new SP case, well, make sure you do that before you slide them in, or like me, you'll have to do it 3 times. So next up, we're going to drop in the screen. Before you do this, make sure that your screen, if it came with a screen protector not already attached, has that screen protector now attached. It's adhesive, it's pretty easy to align it with all the corners, and this, again, is the screen protector that says Game Boy Advance SP on it. Or, of course, if you got one with different text, it would say something else. But then you're going to drop your screen in with the little plug in the bottom right-hand corner. If you're referencing where the hinge is on the bottom, it would be on the right side of the hinge if the hinge is on the bottom. So put that there. Then you're going to take some double-sided tape and stick the circuit board attached to the ribbon cable on, again, that same corner with the ribbon cable facing downwards. And then you can take the little plug from the screen and plug it into the tiny circuit board that you just stuck onto the back of the screen. And voila, your screen is now in the new case. So then you're going to take the ribbon cable and fold it around, kind of up and around, and then put it through the little slot in the hinge, and then you can replace the top plate of the Game Boy Advance SP. Following this, well, assuming you didn't mess anything up like I did and had to totally redo it, you can then start screwing back in the top panel with the same tri-wing screws that came with your original SP. At least that's what I would recommend. You can use the ones that came with the new shell, but they do strip a little bit easier. The only reason I know that is because everybody else mentioned it on videos like these, and also because I had to reopen this SP like 10 times. And you can tell here I am using the new screws I got, and well, I ended up replacing them eventually. But easy enough to screw those back in, and now you've done probably the most stressful part next to the optional soldering that we'll be doing in the next step. But before we get there, you want to drop in the new feet, or again, the old feet if you decided to use the same ones. I just pushed them into place with a Phillips head screwdriver. It was a little bit difficult to stick them in there, but I think these ones were a little bit bigger than the original feet that I had, so who knows. But following that, you can replace the hinge cover and stick the screw back into the bottom under where the ribbon cable is going to be in the near future. Oh, that was a hell of a voice crack. But then you can tin your new solder and, well, I guess not new solder, but you can tin your solder and put a little bit of solder onto the ribbon cable on the contact, and then solder the wire that comes with this whole kit into, or rather onto, that ribbon cable. So before you solder that to the circuit board, we're going to have to plug the ribbon cable back into the circuit board, and before I did that, I wanted to just clean off all the contacts with some isopropyl alcohol. I highly recommend, if yours is quite dirty like mine was, that you do this. For example, the contact where my L button was too dirty for it to even work, and so cleaning that and then actually taking the little silicone pad out and cleaning that too totally fixed that issue. So next, we're going to plug the ribbon cable back in. This is probably the hardest part of the entire thing. I know that I said something like that earlier, but thinking back, this was something that got easier, but it was initially very hard. So stick the ribbon cable back in, and once you do that, you can close the little latches that hold it in place, and then you can take some more solder, put a little bit on the contact. Again, all of the information on the specific contact and a better video of that contact with someone that doesn't have to have it right next to their eyes, because this is the first time they're doing it. You can then put some solder on the contact and solder the other end of the cable that was attached to the ribbon cable to that contact. The wire that came with my lovely kit here was actually kind of terrible. The one that came with the Game Boy Advance was great, but this one was just it kept stiffening and messing up, and it actually came off at some point. But you can see there that I did manage to get it done, and I had to resolder it again later, but we're just going to pretend that it was perfect the first time, because it was working the first time. It's just I had to resolder it because I accidentally ripped it out. But next, you're going to place all the buttons back in. The A and B buttons have little prongs to help you place them in the correct directions, but in this case, unlike the Game Boy Advance, you do have silicone pads for, I think, every button, but not the switches. And here, I would actually recommend waiting on the power button before you put that back in. The volume rocker never came off of mine. I'm not sure if you can replace it very easily, but once you get all the buttons in there and the speaker, because that's something you didn't see me put in here, something I had to reopen and put back in, but you can reattach the circuit board to the shell, and well, we're pretty much almost done. The final thing that we're going to have to do that you'll see here in a second is siphon the hinges from the R and L buttons of the original Game Boy SP. You can see me taking them out here from the new one. In my case, mine actually came with hinges, thank goodness, but a lot of the shells don't come with them, so you may have to replace them. And for these hinges have two very sharp legs to them. You want to make sure that the bent one will end up going underneath the little lever part of the R and L buttons, and then the other straight end will kind of stick off the end there, and you can wrap it around and push it past the little hold there. There's a little hook on the back of it that will hold the pin in there, and this is to sort of keep them in the tight spring that gives the wonderful click that we all love, and that makes this mod somewhat significantly more difficult. But again, I recommend that you look up a tutorial that will show this closer, because it's a little bit hard for me to do, let alone for me to do and show at an awkward angle, which is required for actually showing things in my setup. And finally, once you have those hinges in, you can stick the, I believe it would be called a nut, into the bottom half of the shell, and this is where the battery cover is going to screw into. But then you can take the top half that is a lot more stable than these R and L buttons and drop it onto the bottom half and sort of push them and wiggle them together, but they should lie pretty flat if you did everything up to this point correctly. If not, double check your R and L buttons, because that's what I ended up screwing up, was the hinge of the R and L buttons. But following this, before you screw anything in, I would highly recommend that you stick the battery in and hold it in there with your fingers as you test the Game Boy. You can actually do this before you put the cover on, but it's a lot more difficult and you risk a lot more issues. But you can see here, as I did that, I realized there was no sound and ended up having to take it apart to put the speaker back in that I totally forgot to put in the first time. This is why I mention these things, so that you don't have to deal with the same issues I did, and you don't end up removing the back cover 16 times in the circuit board 12 times to make sure that everything's in place, and accidentally end up removing the whole soldered piece and then dripping solder on the circuit board and screwing everything up like 8 times. I'm fine, I promise. But finally, and for some reason I didn't get this in footage, but make sure that you put the 5 screws, the 5 tri-wing screws, back into the corners and under where the cartridge will go, into the case itself. Make sure before you put the battery in, you also get the tri-wing screw that's underneath there, and then you can stick the battery back in and put the battery cover back on and screw that back in as well. Again, I recommend waiting to put these screws in until you've just double checked and double tested everything to make sure it all works, just to save yourself the headache, and also make sure that you avoid accidentally stripping any screws and taking them in and out 10 times in the same night. Again, same issues that I ran into, and hopefully you can avoid them. So yeah, all in all, it was a good experience in the sense that I'm happy with what I got out of it. This gorgeous, wonderful, pretty custom thing that I made, and I'm very proud of myself for doing it. At the same time, all of the problems that I ran into, namely the soldering issues and dripping solder on the board and then having to kind of figure it out myself and claw through that solder with a really sharp knife as to not short those 2 little pins together that I did this on. Other than that, and the issues I ran in there, and then all of the times I had to take it apart and put it back together, which ended up leading to me needing to resolder, which ended up leading to me dripping solder on the board, which ended up leading to me spending like 6 more hours on this whole project. But that's kind of how these things go, I think. It's really easy to make small mistakes that end up costing you a lot of time, and I think that's one of the important things that an organization will generally fix. And in the future, I hope that I will focus more on that as opposed to focusing more on trying to get a good shot of everything in a certain time limit. But in general, if you organize things well and make sure that you, when you're taking everything apart, you kind of put it in some kind of order that will remind you to do it that way when you go back through that order the opposite way, it'll definitely help you not forget rather, to put stuff back in the system, which will avoid any issues that can come with opening and closing it a bunch of times because of the additional challenges of the whole folding mechanism and how that ribbon cable will stick everything together and, well, really make it tough to just keep open and make minor changes, which isn't an issue in the original Game Boy Advance. And I think that that one thing, although it didn't seem like it caused a lot of issues in itself, it was actually somewhat easy to get into the circuit board, even though it was a very awkward angle. I think that it just caused a lot of issues with opening it and closing it a bunch of times. And so if you don't have to do that and you don't screw the things up I did, well, then it shouldn't be a problem. But yeah, that definitely makes reopening it and fixing things that you messed up a lot more time consuming because it has to be held in such specific positions and it's kind of awkward to try to get it in and back out. But yeah, I think that I would probably prefer, if I were to just be building one myself, to build the actual original landscape Game Boy Advance. But in all honesty, I kind of do prefer the SP. I don't know why. I spent quite a lot of time with both of them over the course of my childhood, and I think that the SP to me just kind of feels higher quality. It feels fancier. It's hard to explain because even with both of them having the exact same quality buttons, both of them having the exact same kind of IPS screen, I still kind of prefer the SP. And I can't tell you why, but I will say that the one thing I noticed is less thumb strain on the SP, which is weird because, you know, it's a lot smaller buttons, things are more cramped. But for me, I think that the way that I jam my thumb into the control pad when I'm playing is a lot less painful on the SP for some reason. But also, I've only been playing Shantae on the SP, and that doesn't quite have the same amount of very specific constant movements that you need to do perfectly or you're gonna die, which is what happened with Metroid Fusion. So who knows, maybe I'll decide that I think the opposite in a few months, but the cool thing is I can do that now. For less than $200, I have two brand new Game Boys that have better screens than something you would spend about $150 on eBay for. The screen that I put in this new Game Boy SP and the Game Boy Advance I made a few weeks ago is brighter, it's more vibrant, and it's just all around better, in my opinion, assuming that you don't want it to look worse to be more accurate to the original SP, but it's just generally better than what was in the AGS-101, which is kind of the late production Game Boy SP models that are much brighter and also much more expensive. I've seen them go for as much as $175 for certain models, and obviously, depending on the condition of them, well, you might have to replace the shell anyways because it might be in crap condition, considering all that people really care about and all that's driving up the price is that screen. At the same time, if you do love that for accuracy's sake, you can buy AGS-101 replica screens from pretty much any of the same retailers that I got this IPS screen from. I wouldn't recommend it because I, again, just see it as a generally worse screen, but hey, it's an option. And if that's sort of what you're looking to do, great, go ahead and do it. But again, all things together, I would definitely recommend that if you really don't care of the form factor, go with the Game Boy Advance. Much easier, a lot easier to fix and reopen if you screw anything up. And the soldering, well, I suppose you could cause exactly the same problems if you were soldering on that board, but the good news is, again, you don't have that ribbon cable that's sticking through the hinge and holding everything in an awkward position when you're trying to fix things. Regardless, let me know what you guys think about this. Have you ever tried one of these? If you have, please let me know if you have any suggestions for future builds. I think I have it pretty much down at this point, but yeah, those were the issues I ran into, my experience, and let me know what you guys think of the colors and stuff that I chose in the comments down below if you want to. Regardless, thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you guys in the next video, and hopefully it will, in the somewhat near future, maybe be another mod project. I'm saying this like I have something planned. I don't have something planned, I'm just thinking about it. But regardless, thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you guys in the next video, but for now, goodbye everybody.